160, CISM, and we've already had a class or two. And so it's time for the second half of chapter 2 here. So let me get to those slides. And by the way, the last day to add is Friday. So if you want to add this course or any of my other courses, except for 123 and 124, which are full, you can add them, make a request by Friday. I'll approve them. Anyway, so here we are. That's what we already talked about in part 1, and now we're up to part 2, which is security strategy development. And all right, so your strategy is your plan to achieve an objective of some kind. And so you have objectives. One, you define a strategic alignment, which is your future state. We want to achieve, say, ISO 27000 compliance, a certain state you want to achieve. And then you have to have risk management, where you decide what risks there are and manage them. You decide which risks are acceptable, and the risks that are unacceptable, you lower them by putting in controls. And this is the idea. We will have some kind of value delivery. There'll be some measure of how successful you are with your security program, so your boss can decide if the money you're spending is worth it. Unfortunately, as you talked about last time, people cannot calculate the return on investment for security. It's hard to prove that you save this much money, but you should have some kind of measure of whether you're succeeding or failing, or your management will typically not be happy funding the program. So another thing that happens is you get resource optimization. If you organize your company more correct, as your company becomes more mature, you organize things, you'll have less waste. And like I say, you'll have performance measurements. You should have some measurements of your security team. And your company will become more organized as it's all working together, and you can avoid having one team undoing what another team is doing. So there are control frameworks to help you do this. There are a bunch of them, and just like the stuff I talked about last time, my students that got jobs in industry told me that they really wish they paid more attention really learning these control frameworks, because people use them, and at first they just seem too mind-bogglingly complicated and confusing. But whatever progress you can make towards understanding them will benefit you in the real industry, because everybody is really using these. Now, your amateur small companies might not, but you can't grow very much before you are expected to comply with these, and usually you do it to get a job. Like, you can't do government business with the government without meeting the NIST standards. You can't make contracts with other large companies without meeting appropriate standards. They want to know, well, which one of these standards do you meet? And so, COBIT is from ISACA, the same people that make this certification. And this is one way to organize your IT. So you've got plan and organize, acquire and implement, deliver and support, and monitor and evaluate. And in global, large-scale terms, all of these are the same. They all have the same general thing. You make some kind of plan for your IT and your security team, then you implement it, then you deliver it, and support it with your help desk and such, and then somehow you monitor to see if it's working and evaluate how to make it better. And the highest level of any of these security frameworks is optimizing, where you have a loop where you constantly measure how good it is and then improve your plan to make it better, and then do that over and over so you're continuously improving. That's the highest level of these frameworks. So COBIT is an IT process framework, not particularly security, but it has a lot of processes, and here's some of the security-related ones, like risk management and managing security resources, and as I said, evaluating and assessing compliance with external requirements. ISO, IEC 27001 is a one you hear a lot of. This is an international standard. If you're a large company and you want to sell to governments and large corporations, especially in other countries, they expect you to meet this. It is really difficult to meet. I've heard people say it takes like 2 years and $1 million to achieve 27,000 compliance. They charge you more than $100 just to have the documents, and the documents are like a phone book full of papers. It's really big and complicated, but the end result, if you do this, is now you can play with the big companies. And this is when I was a kid, they complained that if the Pentagon bought the Army a hammer, they had to pay $800 for it. And the reason they do is because they don't just get a hammer, they have a structure like this with all these layers of management and all these forms and audits and everything. That's what makes it so expensive. There's a ton of bureaucratic overhead here. What this means is you don't just make a product and sell it. There's a blizzard of paper recording, this has been examined, this has been audited, this has been improved, this process has been checked. All that jazz is what's going on in the background. So it checks the context of the organization, your leadership, planning, support, evaluation of performance, and then continuous improvement. Like I said, they all have that structure. And so you have controls, you have policies, you have human resource security. Many companies do not actually check your resume. 75% of resumes have lies on them because most companies don't call or check to see if you really went to that college or anything. And people don't even call your previous employers to see why they fired you because maybe you did something awful. You know, that's the kind of thing human resource security should be doing. Then you have access control to limit who's allowed to get at your resources, and cryptographic and physical security. And then you secure your operations. One big issue here is your software development. That's what supply chain attacks are all over the news because of the Russian SolarWinds attack a few years ago, where they poisoned the development servers at the SolarWinds company so that when you updated your legitimate SolarWinds product with the official update, it was now under control of the Russians. It was brilliant and incredibly effective, and they owned most of American government agencies. And they probably still own most of them because they were in there for months before we found out, and they used that to plant more bombs and backdoors in there. So it's really not important to secure your operations. And your supplier relationships, this is what's a big issue all over the internet now, all over security, is software bill of materials. If you run software, that software uses libraries, and those libraries use more libraries, and where did they come from, and are they really all the latest version, and do you really know that they're secure, and that they're not poisoned? And that's not simple, and people are trying to address this with great difficulty now. Anyway, then you have to have incident management and business continuity management. Incident management responds to security incidents, and deals to limit the harm, and business continuity management deals with disruptions of your business, things like fires and floods and pandemics that affect your business. You have a plan to survive this. And then, of course, compliance with standards, external standards. ISO 38500 is governance of IT for the organization, and ISO 20000 is the framework of processes for IT delivery developed by the UK. There's a lot of these. HIPAA is an American standard. You hear about it a lot. This was put there because the U.S. government decided there were people that would die because they would go on a trip, then they get hit by a car, then when the ambulance picks them up, there's no way to check their medical records, so they wouldn't know that they're allergic to a drug or something, give them the wrong drug. And so to address that, they said we should put all health records on the internet so you can get them everywhere. But then if you're going to do that, it should be secured so it's not leaking. And that's what this does. This is portability and accountability for health insurance data. The data has to be available on the internet, and then it has to be protected. And there are general rules. It must be encrypted, must be access, must be limited, and so on. So there are requirements here to protect health data. So if you handle health data in quantity, like an insurance agency, then you have to obey these HIPAA rules, and you have to submit reports proving that you're HIPAA compliant. The NIST SP 800 is a series of documents from the National Institute of Standards, and this is privacy controls for federal information systems and organizations. All U.S. government systems must obey this. So those are the standards they're required to obey. Although, I should mention parenthetically that the U.S. military set cybersecurity standards about a decade ago, and every year they do an audit. And last year I heard was about 2 years ago, and they said our audits have shown that we are 95% out of compliance. Because although we know what we should be doing, we haven't been funded to actually do it. So I wonder to what extent the government agencies actually live up to this. I suspect not so much. But anyway, they're supposed to. And so there's a lot of categories: access control, training your staff, auditing. Configuration management is controlling the configuration of your routers and switches and endpoint devices, planning for contingencies, incident response, like I said, maintenance, protecting your media, and your personnel security, and many other things here. It's a big, complicated job to set this up. Then there's another one from the National Institute of Standards, the CSF one. This is a way to assess risk and measure control effectiveness. And so it has a framework core, which is identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. That's the incident response pattern. And then you have various maturity levels, from the least mature to most mature. So you partially achieve this. Risk informed means you actually know what risk you're taking. Repeatable means you have procedures, so staff knows to do the same thing. And then adaptive is always the highest level, where you have a whole program where you set the goals, you implement controls, you measure the success, and then you adjust to continuously improve. And not every company has to be at the highest level, but you should know where you are. All right. And so here's another one from the Center for Internet Security. This is based on the SANS 20 controls. SANS is a training organization. If you get a chance to take SANS classes, take them. They're very good. The problem is they're very expensive. I've had SANS instructors in my class, and I've got to sit in on a few of them. They're really quite good. Basically, all my cybersecurity classes here are basically imitation SANS classes. SANS has all these classes, but they're all very expensive. So you don't want to go there unless your boss is paying for it. Anyway, here's the 20 critical controls. You inventory your devices and your software. You have secure configurations for all the devices. You have continuous vulnerability assessment, so you're scanning to see if there's old versions or open ports that shouldn't be open and things like that. You limit administrative privileges. You monitor the audit logs. Yeah, and you protect your email and web browser, watch for malware, limit your ports with firewalls, and have backups, data recovery. Have secure configurations for your devices, boundary defense, controlled access, wireless controls, all the stuff you might imagine, incident response and management, and penetration tests and red team exercises to have attackers come in to test your defenses. These are all recommended controls. And then there's PCI. PCI is what you must comply with if you take credit cards. And as you know, almost everybody does. However, there are levels. If you take a small amount of credit cards, like I think less than something like 50,000 transactions a year, then all you have to do is fill out a form saying you do these 10 things. They don't audit you or anything. But if you've ever been hacked, or if you have a lot of transactions, like 1 million a year, then you must pay for a special auditor to come audit your system every year and check to see if you're doing all this stuff. And it's not a government agency. It's a consortium of credit card brands that just got together and did self-regulation, Visa and MasterCard and the other credit card brands. And so you have to have a firewall. You can't use defaults for system passwords. You have to protect the stored data. You have to encrypt the data, protect your systems against malware, maintain secure systems and applications, authenticate access to system components so you know who's getting in there, restrict physical access, monitor access, do testing, and there's a special series of auditors that will audit you to make sure you're doing this if you have a lot of credit cards. However, they are pretty forgiving, which is why every company you've ever heard that lost credit card data, they were PCI compliant. You could argue it's not working very well. But anyway, you do have to meet the standard, or you have to explain why you don't have to implement this control, which you can do. It's not as simple as just 100% obeying or not obeying. It's more like a lawsuit. You have to explain what you did to the satisfaction of the auditor. Well, I didn't implement these wireless controls because we don't have a wireless network. That would be a good reason why I don't have to bother with that sort of thing. Anyway, let's try a Kahoot. Okay, I don't see any chat in there. That's all right then. Here's 2B1. Yes. All right. here comes somebody. Okay, I'll wait a little bit longer then. All right. All right, so which framework comes from ISACA? COBIT is the one that comes from ISACA. All right. All right, which framework is required for U.S. government systems? Instead of Kahoot. Well, you won't win. You don't use the Kahoot website, you won't win the extra credit. All right, anyway, so NIST, the one from the National Institute of Standards, is the one that government systems must obey. This is an international one, not a U.S. one. So it doesn't apply to U.S. government systems. All right, which framework is based on the SANS critical controls? Yep, CIS 20, the 20 critical controls. All right, which framework was developed by the UK? Yeah, the ITIL. This is international, but I don't think it's from the UK. This is the one from the UK. All right. And J, carry on. Let's see. All right, hope those initials are good enough for my grade to identify you uniquely. What's that? It's you? Okay, all right. All right, anyway. All right, let's carry on. 6:30, we can keep going. All right, so risk. These are objectives to deal with risk. It's hard to quantify risk numerically. We were, in fact, on the Fall Security podcast, we were just recording, people are getting all upset because CVSS scores attempt to do this. There's this number from 0 to 10, and people were assigning something a 9.8 that should probably only be a 1. Even in a simple case like a vulnerability, it can get hard to quantify. So typically just have high, medium, low for your risk. So your strategy, to plan your strategy of risk assessments and threat assessments are two types of data coming in. And there's other inputs like your policies, your risk ledger, which is a history of what you've done in the past, your issues like your insurance, and these other things like the risk appetite of your company, which we talked about last time. Some companies are very reluctant to accept any risk like a bank. They want to use the most secure thing. Even if it's more expensive and difficult to use, they don't care. Whereas other companies like Facebook love risk. They don't mind at all. They just want to have excitement and new features flying out. And they don't really care if it causes problems. So risk assessment is when you will determine how dangerous various things are and what controls to put in. When it's done in the best way, you take it seriously and you improve your company, but a lot of companies see this as a waste of their time. They just do compliance. They just do whatever they're required to do for like PCI or whatever they need with the minimum effort, and they don't take it seriously. All right, they call those the checkbox companies. They just check a box just so it's done, which doesn't really make them very secure, but it does improve it a little bit. I remember when HIPAA came out, I was reporting exposed medical data to a university in Louisiana, and because HIPAA had come out, they're required to have a HIPAA report email. So I reported it to them, they took it down. Before HIPAA compliance, I would have to go through the general help desk and probably never reach anybody. But the fact that they had a HIPAA office meant I could reach somebody that actually cared about hiding the data. Anyway, so threat assessment focuses on external threats instead of vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities depend on what version of software you have, and there's always new ones coming out. The threats are more constant. Why would someone attack you? What types of people would attack you? What techniques would they use? It's more general. And then you got policy. So you have the breadth of coverage, relevance and strictness, consequences, compliance and review. These are all issues of how you're going to implement your security policy. And then standards are detailed specifications of how to do things at your company. We are going to use the McAfee antivirus. We are going to use this firewall with this configuration and so on. Detailed specifications of how to do things at your company. And often you get them from a group like NIST that has recommended ways to do things. Microsoft does this too. They publish recommended security group policy objects for different types of servers, for domain controller and email server and so on. Many organizations do give you recommended secure postures to start from. Then you can have guidelines. Guidelines give you more guidance how to achieve your policy goals. And this is a more advanced level of your organization typically. If you have this, other people have nothing more than policies and standards. And you'll have processes and procedures, again, which will show how you achieve things and the experiences of your employees. And then architecture is the layout of your infrastructure. There are companies, I heard of a company where they don't even have a wiring diagram anymore. They found out that nobody ever keeps it up to date, so it's useless. So every time you want to change anything, you have to go crawling around following the wires. That's the only way to get it right. And I've seen telephone networks at apartment houses that are like this, just crazy rat's nest of wires everywhere. That's one way to go, but it's usually considered a lot better to actually be organized and have documentation that's accurate of your infrastructure and such. And so now you have controls. Often, as I mentioned, controls are only on paper, not in practice, like the US military has this standard they're supposed to meet, but they don't actually meet it. But anyway, so you examine them, and you maybe have a control framework, which would specify what level you have of controls, and also that there's some process of proving that with documents and audits and such. Right, so then you've got the skills of your people, how many years of experience your people have, other behavioral measures, what disciplines are covered by your staff, and what technologies are covered by your staff. These are all issues of how skilled your people are. And then you have metrics. You try to determine if you've achieved your goal, so you have to define some kind of goal, like less people clicking on phishing links, less malware infections, more rapid response to security incidents, something like that. So you can protect your assets from the viewpoint of vulnerability management. You run a scanner to see if there are known vulnerabilities in your systems, and then remediate them through putting on patches or other things, like blocking traffic with firewall or things like that. The risk ledger keeps track of what risks you've found and what you did about them, so you have a record, and you can compare it. Your vulnerability assessment looks at the maturity level of having one of these. Your vulnerability assessments will help indicate the maturity level of your security program. And you might buy insurance. This is cyber risk insurance is a big thing. A lot of people are buying it and selling it. It is really difficult to determine. A lot of people find that coverage doesn't really cover them when things happen. It's real hard to know how big the risk is, how big the consequence of getting hacked is, so it's hard to set a price. But there is cyber insurance out there, and people are buying it. Then there's critical data. This is one simple question. About 10 years ago, BART got hacked, but not really. There was another company called like GoBART that was selling BART tickets with credit cards that wasn't BART. And they got hacked, so a bunch of BART riders had their data stolen. So it wasn't really BART that got hacked, but it was BART customers who got exposed, so they suffered reputational damage. And this is where you get, if you just ask a company, what is your important data? And they say, okay, how many copies of it are there, and where are they? They typically can't answer. Well, it's on the server, it's on the backup tape, I put a copy on my laptop, people put it in their Google Drive, it's in the email, some people have it on their phones, it's on thumb drives. I don't know how many copies there are or where it is. And this is where people start, and you can't secure it until you get more organized than that. And you begin limiting how people use cloud services and portable devices and everything else, so you know where is your critical data, and then how is it protected. Then business impact analysis determines how important the parts of your company are, the maximum tolerable downtime. How long could you live without the accounting department? How long could the web server be down? How much would this affect you? You can plan for this. And this is an important part of business continuity and disaster recovery planning. If you're trying to recover from a disaster, you need to know what processes to bring back first and what processes you can do without for a while. So you have a security incident log, keeping track of what incidents you had and what you did about them, and the more mature you get, the more detailed this will be and the more helpful. And many people outsource services. Many of them get managed service providers to provide security. They don't even have any security staff. They have just one IT person who outsources things to other companies, and that can be fine, but you have to be aware of this. You're now trusting somebody else to protect you, and you have your due diligence. You are supposed to inspect a company before you hire them to do work for you and check their reputation and make sure that you have some reason to trust them. And then you can assess the risk of this relationship. Like I said, Bart trusted some other company with data, which apparently they shouldn't have trusted. So they had a third-party risk. I teach at a financial company, and they have a whole category of security policies for third-party relationships. You can audit them, you can have contracts, there's all these policy rules just for under what circumstances will we let somebody else have our data, which is what you have to have. You're trusting them. This happened to Kaiser. About 10 years ago, Kaiser got an email from someone in Bangladesh saying, you owe me $100 or $10 or something, if you don't do it, I'm going to dump your data on the web. And they said, what is this nonsense? They ignored it. Then she sent them like records of real Kaiser data. They said, why is our data in Bangladesh? Who is this person? What happened here? They had hired some company to do data entry, and without telling them, they outsourced it to people in Bangladesh for like $1 a day and then didn't pay them. And they're like, who is this person? How did this happen? That's what can happen when you trust somebody else. It's a problem. That's third-party risk. All right, so you got audits. You can do an internal audit of your own company's features to see how it works, and then you can have an external audit. I used to work for a financial company that worked on Federal Trade Commission cases, and they really liked us because we had a very strong internal audit. Every time we finished a case, we did an internal audit. We'd make a document that totally explained every piece of data that came in, every dollar that came in, where everything went, and then we have an external audit every year. The Federal Trade Commission would come in, and we just say, here it is, wham, right here. They said, this is great. Say, we've been to other companies, and there's just a pile of unsorted paper. You guys have got it together. Anyway, so you define your audit, and then you've got a culture. Culture, I've really seen this happen a lot. Like when I found a vulnerability on Jerry Brown's website, when he was the governor of California, I called the general helpline on the website, and I said, I have a vulnerability report, and they immediately transferred me to an intelligent IT person who immediately fixed it. Now, that does not happen even 1% of the time. I've done hundreds of vulnerability disclosures, and usually they have no idea what you're talking about. They hang up on you, they blame you for it, they lie to you. It's very rare, and that I've been impressed. That's a good culture. You know, if you have good leadership, then people know what their job is, and they know we expect good work here, and good work is rewarded. You can have a good culture where everybody knows from the top to the bottom to do good work, but that's not what you get unless you have good leadership. Anyway, and that's your maturity. You can have a measure of how mature your security program is. And like I say, it takes years to develop a good security program and attain a high level of maturity, but you have to start where you are and make improvements. So let's try another Kahoot. It's a lot like doctors telling you, you should lose weight, you should stop smoking, and you can't expect people to do everything perfect right away. You try to move them a little bit from where they are, and then maybe a little more. That's the only thing you can realistically do. But often, companies put a lot of effort into achieving one of those compliance frameworks because they want to do a job. One of my students was hired at a big cloud provider, and they said, make us PCI compliant because we want to offer our service to banks, and banks require PCI compliance. So a big push to achieve that. And that's often what drives people to do this. You have an opportunity to make a business deal, but only if you meet a compliance framework. Oh, any questions over here? Who's in charge of dealing with cyber insurance companies? Boy, it would be at companies. Yeah. I don't know. They would have to make their own decision. It would whether to buy insurance. It's a good question. I don't really know who would do it. And how to calculate security maturity? Well, the compliance frameworks have sort of general levels, but I don't know if it's really so much you calculate as you see whether you have certain controls. All these compliance things are not as cut and dried as you might think. It's just like a lawsuit. There's rules, then somebody sues and said you broke the rules, and then there's sort of a judgment. Well, did you really break the rules in a way that mattered or not? It's not like as simple as a mathematical calculation. Anyway, let's see how this stuff goes. All right, so maximum tolerable downtime. What process determines that? That's business impact analysis, which, by the way, you can see is kind of insulting. You tell people, well, your part of the company isn't very important. This part over here is more important. But that is a thing to know if you're going to organize your company. Anyway. All right, which one has internal and external versions? Audits. I say your internal audits done by your own staff, external audits done by other people to see if you're meeting standards. All right, which one would specify what brand of a product to use? Standards, good. All right, and which process focuses on external actors? That's threat assessment. You focus on who would attack us, why would they attack us, what techniques would they use, and then you base your controls on that. And I think that's Elsie again, good. Like I say, you might want to give me more of your name to make sure my grader finds you, but she might find you just from your initials. I think you told me one of these classes there's a person that just gave their first name like Steve or something, and we don't know which Steve they are, so be aware. If you don't give me a complete name, we might have trouble recording your points when you win. Anyway, so then there's strategy development. So your goals will be things like improving your protective controls, improving your ability to identify a security incident and respond to it, reductions in risk and cost, and therefore increased resiliency so your business can survive security incidents. So you might have broad sweeping objectives like implement a SIM, security information and event management system. The industry leader is Splunk, which I teach in other classes here, to provide visibility into security events. Make an instant response program, make an awareness program for train the staff. These are objectives you might have to improve your security posture. To improve existing capabilities, you could integrate your system, your vulnerability management, and your global risk governance, risk, and compliance system. You could link your security awareness program and your access management program so staff have to complete security awareness in order to retain system access. This, by the way, is true at the large corporations I consult for. I have to do security awareness training, and if you don't, they lock you out. They're not messing around because they have to check a box saying all staff did this training before they could access the data. They're not kidding, you know. So you have gap assessment. You measure your current state and your desired state, and the difference between them is the gap. So you compare your strategy, your security charter, your risk assessments, your security metrics, and your risk ledger. All these things will help you determine the gap between where you are and where you want to be. And then you include all the various issues like third-party risk and so on. And then you can examine your program. This absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. This is really important. I can't tell you, it seems to me like 2/3 of the time when there's a hack, they say this company lost some data, and they say we have no evidence that anybody has used that data or that anybody actually downloaded the data from that unprotected server. They love to say this. We have no reason to believe that anybody took the data because we don't do any logging, so we wouldn't know, but they don't tell you that part. You know, that's the problem. Unless you really do monitor your network, when you say we don't have evidence that stuff was stolen, that doesn't mean much of anything. Anyway, there's a lot of other issues here, like the politics and people that hide things from other parts of the company with their turf. There's things that happen that are not written down. You know, there's quite many aspects to a security program. So here's one way to look at it. You got helpful and harmful things, and you have internal and external things. So the things that help you internally are your strengths. The things that help you externally are opportunities. The things that hurt you internally are weaknesses. And the things that hurt you externally are threats. So that's one way to organize your thinking. The capability maturity model, integration for development from Carnegie Mellon. This is, someone was just asking, how do you measure maturity? And here's some of the models for doing that. So level 1 is a process where you do something like you make hamburgers and sell them, but there is no like consistent procedure or anything. So different cooks don't really do it the same. Then there's repeatable, where at least you train your staff like McDonald's, where everybody knows what to do and they all do the same thing. Then there's defined, well-defined and documented. And then there's managed, where you actually define with numbers some measure of performance and compliance. And then optimizing is the highest level, like I say, where you make policy, you make training, you make standards, then you measure to see how good it is, then you improve it and have an endlessly improving system. These are the 5 levels of maturity in the CMMI dev system. There are other maturity models, and the fact that 5 is the highest maturity level does not mean that your company should be a 5. You have to decide what's appropriate for your company. You might not be trying to be a multinational corporation doing business with foreign governments and military and need the highest level. You might be, you know, a restaurant with 3 locations and you don't need that fancy stuff. You decide what level is good enough for your company. So you make steps, you make a roadmap to achieve your objective. And so here's an example of what you might have. In 3 to 6 months, we're going to provision some kind of system to keep track of our people. Then we're going to, in 12 to 18 months, we're going to improve the sign-on with passwords, policies, and then 12 to 18 months, we're going to go out here to federated identities, which is authentication system that shares authentication information with other servers. So logging into one company will get you into others. And you know, one thing almost every company wants to do is move to 2-factor authentication, and you can't just do that overnight. It takes time. Especially as you move forward, you will discover that there are systems that are not ready to go to 2-factor, like your monitoring and logging systems and such. And so it's the kind of thing that will typically take you like a year or more to gradually roll out 2-factor. So you got your policy development, typically based on a framework where you've decided what people should do, and your controls. You develop your controls. You're going to have to change your controls. You have to describe your controls. You may change the scope, like to cover new locations, or your testing, or add entirely new controls as you improve your security posture. So there are control frameworks. We've mentioned it before, the CSC, the ISO 27000, and NIST 853. These all have lists of controls like we saw, like HR controls and firewalls and antivirus and all that. So policies define what should be done. Standards specify how to do it. So the policies are unspecific but long-lasting, and the standards are specific, but they change more frequently as you switch to new vendors and new versions of things come out. So you have to develop your standards carefully so you can successfully implement them and they're clear, and hopefully you can automate their directives. And so you'll specify protocols you're using, vendors, programming languages, methodologies, and control frameworks. These are common standards you'll have. And you'll identify your undocumented processes and document them so everything is defined, and then you try to establish consistency and then have development and review of these things as you move up through the levels of maturity. So you define the roles and responsibilities of your people. I know I worked at small companies where I wanted to know my job title, and they said, oh, any title you want. Everybody just had to do whatever needed to be done. But the bigger companies, it gets more organized. Like Microsoft actually has a job where you're doing one thing and you actually get the certification to prepare you to do that one thing. But small companies, you just all pitch in and do whatever's got to be done. So training and awareness is the main defense against phishing. You train your staff to hopefully not click on links and open email attachments and all that. And so for any security program, you want to develop a business case. You state the problem, you find out the current state and desired state, you determine what criteria you'll use to measure success and the requirements, and then you get approval from management and a plan to do this. I've done this a million times for things like proposing classes at conferences and stuff. So you determine whether it's going to align with your organization and how it's going to help the business succeed. Many security people get in the way of business. Like, no, you can't do that, you can't do that, you have to do this difficult thing instead, two-factor authentication, 10-digit passwords that I change every 90 days, and they just get in the way of success. You have to be helping the company succeed, or your security program will not be accepted. So you have communications reporting, your board of directors, your governance, and various other organizations here are measuring and sending information about security around. And so you have to get management commitment. This is often a problem. Your management is often MBA types that aren't very technical and aren't very aware of security, and you have to explain to them what the risks are. Another thing that is incredibly common is that the upper management refuses to obey your security policy. Like I worked at a company where the boss's password was 123. And this is very common. And when you pass a rule, like everybody has to have 10-character passwords, the boss says it doesn't apply to him. And that's a problem. But this is the problem. They often think they're an unlikely target. The most important, most rich people typically have the lousiest security. There was a movie that came out a while ago about Paris Hilton. She just never locked her door. And these teenage girls figured it out. And they'd just go in her house and steal her stuff. And this went on for like a year before she figured it out, because she was just in the habit of never locking her doors anywhere. Anyway, so the security strategy must inform management. The old-fashioned technique is to scare them with some scary headline, but this is not as good as actually explaining the value of it to them. Anyway, a lot of people have normalcy bias. They say they don't think they've been hacked, probably because they don't actually have enough monitoring to know if they've been hacked, and therefore they think everything is fine. Anyway, then there's strategy constraints. People often just don't want to have resistance to change. They don't want to change their traditional ways of doing things. This often gets in the way. That's why typically what I've heard is you can't implement good security at a company until they get hacked. They won't pay attention until they get hurt. However, everybody's getting hacked. Even 4 years ago, I saw a survey that said 80% of companies had been hacked and had lost money as a result in the last year. So there's a time, maybe 8 years ago, when most companies would say, oh, we're not going to get hacked. That doesn't really happen. That only happens to other people. Very few people still think that way. They pretty much all know it's a real risk and we should be doing something about it. So you've got to fit into the organizational structure and, of course, fit in the budget, and there may be regulatory obligations. If you're in a regulated industry like energy or finance, then there are external rules you must obey. And then you got, of course, organizational inertia, so you have to implement your program in a way that doesn't disrupt the operation of the business too much. And that's art. There's a lot of politics and interpersonal interaction in doing this. You have to befriend the other people in the company, and they have to know they can trust you Then you can talk to them about their security policies and help them find a way to improve it. They know you're not going to go like rat them out to the boss and get them fired for doing something bad. You have to, it's a lot of human interaction and negotiation and social engineering involved in this. It's not just technical mathematics and appliances. It's convincing humans to do the right thing. All right, let's try the last Kahoot. Good, we're right on time, on target with the time here. All right. Who judges the maturity level? Is there a rubric? Well, you saw a couple go by there. She didn't have surveillance cameras at home. I don't remember what that's referring to. Oh, no, Harris Hilton did not. She didn't have cameras and she didn't lock the doors. So these teenage girls just rampaged through her stuff for a long time before they got caught. I imagine she has all that now. After this, she probably hired a security consultant to improve things. That's how it happens. They say there's no problem until they get hurt. Then they realize there's a problem. Donald Trump is a similar character, right? He just takes all this classified stuff, just sticks it in the bathroom, doesn't lock it or anything, because the rules don't apply to him. And Boris Johnson did the same thing. He eventually lost his prime ministership because he passed these strict COVID rules, and then he just blatantly broke them because, of course, they don't apply to me. Nothing applies to me. I'm important. They just don't realize. It's the way nobility used to act. Law doesn't apply to me. I can just take whatever I want. That's right. They like the password of 123. I've been using this password for 30 years. It's never got me in trouble yet. They just make up those rules to bother me. So which process finds the difference between your current state and the desired state? Yep, gap assessment. All right. Which item is unspecific but long-lasting? Your policy will be something like, we protect our customers' information. And then, standards will be more details of how you do that, but your policy will be some broad statement like that. Okay, CMMI Dev, what's the highest level of maturity? Optimizing, where you have a whole closed loop of continuous improvement. That's the highest, most desirable level. And what's the main defense against phishing? There are endless arguments over how well it works, but in fact, that's the main point of training and awareness. They're hoping if you train your staff, they won't fall for phishing so much. There are arguments about whether this is true. Anyway, Akram and Jay, carry on again. Oh. Okay, and LC, doing good. All right, that's it for this lecture. Let me turn off the video.